This is When I Grow Up with Paul Glazby.
Michael,
Paul,
welcome again.
and to you.
Looking very smart today. You must have had an appointment.
I've had appointments and will continue to have appointments.
Hopefully. So this week we're going to talk about value and how we, and buyers and sellers, determine value of a property. You've got an interesting take on this, so I'll let you go.
Yeah. Well, I think for a lot of homeowners, they tend to feel that, we'll call in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, however many agents they want to talk to. And I guess they're looking for a number of things that influence the decision to list a property with a particular agent. I think first and foremost, they're looking for someone that they like and trust. So I think there has to be a certain level of relationship. I don't think people list with agents they don't like. And certainly I don't think they list with agents they don't trust. I think the next things that sort of come into play are things like fees and advertising, sales strategies. But I think the overwhelming thing that a lot of owners tend to think that we're expert in is value. And I think there's a real misconception in our industry, to be brutally frank with you, that as agents we're there to value people's homes. We're not sworn valuers. Generally, most real estate agents, and I'd suggest that probably up to 98% of them, if not higher, are in fact completely not sworn valuers. So, to be a licensed valuer, a sworn valuer, is a tertiary qualification that most real estate agents don't hold. We do hold, obviously, estate agents' licenses, but we're not there to value properties in the way that a valuer would value a property. And so I think when people are interviewing agents, they tend to, look for guidance on price, which is normal. I mean, we sell homes, every day, every second day, every third, or however many you do. And I think that owners do look for us, or to us, for some sort of guidance. And it can be a very incentivised industry, that if an agent tells you a price you like or that you weren't expecting, it can be very tempting for an owner to then list their property with that agent. And I think that price is something that an agent needs to know how to create as opposed to just state.
Yeah.
And often you do find that it sets up a very bad relationship between the agent and the owner, because if agents overpromise on what a property might sell for, they're going to spend the better part of their time trying to convince the owner to reduce their price. And I think that's where relationships break down. And I think it's where our industry, quite frankly, gets a really bad reputation. So I think it's important that price is a discussion that you have with a seller, but I think it needs to be based on some proper metrics that are available, and generally they're available for everybody, not just real estate agents. These days, with the amount of online information, there's just so much readily available information on what properties are selling for that I think most owners generally have a reasonable idea as to what their property is worth. Having said that, you and I both know that we've got hundreds of examples of properties that have sold for so much more than what both we think and what the owners think. And when markets turn and they become bad, it can be the reverse of that. In fact, it can sell for considerably less than what we all thought. Our job is to deliver the best price in whatever that market may be.
Yeah. I mean, I found having some properties that are a bit more. On the flip side, Magnolia Circuit, where I sell a lot, so 35 sales in one street, I can usually pinpoint that within 10, 20,000 as to where it's going to sit, because you've got so much comparable sales, and even though they're not all exactly the same, and there's different floor plans, and there's, I kind of get a sense of where they're going to land. But then, other properties that are most recently, well, I'm not going to give the address, but like the big block, small house, beautiful house, but just, the land wasn't completely usable, even though it was a big block. It was somewhat usable, but the people that came through that loved the house didn't like the block for whatever reason. It was too big, it was too hard to maintain, whatever. The people that liked the block didn't like the house, and it's trying to find that, and eventually, the people that bought it, they loved both, and they were willing to pay the price. So sometimes it takes a bit of time to find the person, but it doesn't always work out. Like sitting and waiting is not always the best. There's no guarantee that you're going to see the value that you may feel it's worth. Sometimes as an agent and as a seller, because typically when an agent is appointed by a seller, there's some kind of agreement. You know, like you've offered a price as what you think it might be worth, and the owners, they've not listed it and gone, oh well, I don't think it's worth that, but I'll sell it with you anyway. They go, okay, well yeah, I agree. And like you said, they probably interview 3, 4, 5 other agents, and if everyone's kind of in that same realm, it gives them confidence that that's what it's worth. But we can all get it wrong until you start getting buyers through and getting feedback from people. You really don't know, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's that sort of grey area in real estate. And again, as I said, it's very tempting to list with the agent who quotes you the highest price. And I guess, you know, poorly skilled agents really prey on the two things that I think most owners, you know, without a great deal of knowledge in the process, will make decisions on, and that is, you know, who can get me the highest price and who's prepared to do it for the cheapest price. Yeah. And that can really be a recipe for disaster, because if an owner is being led by an agent that is not really being accurate with the pricing, or more importantly, if they're over-promising what the value of a property is simply to entice an owner to list with them, I think that they're going to be disappointed. And, you know, again, our industry, we don't have the best reputation. A lot of people look at real estate agents as not professionals. We're not looked upon as you know, our doctors or our lawyers or our accountants. And in theory, we should be, because we're looking after a significant asset of our clients. So, yeah, value is a really tough thing. And I think it would be a really interesting thing if owners were forced to choose an agent, not based on any pricing. You know, if agents were prohibited from even giving a price because they're not qualified per se to do that. But more importantly, the owner had to make the decision based on who presented the best strategy. So if price didn't become a part of the equation, then it would force agents to be a little more professional and polished in their delivery of what it is they're actually going to do to get the highest price, not simply just stating it the highest price. And I think when you talk to owners, if you can sort of quarantine the conversation around price for a period, so that you can talk with the owner openly and transparently about, you know, what it is we actually are going to do to achieve the highest price, I think that the owners will be in a much better position. And I think that it allows the agent the freedom of really doing what is required to get the very best price.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always say value, it's like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder. Like, so there's an example, a property I sold in Palm Beach a couple of years ago now, but it always sticks in my mind because that property sold for 1.375, but the first two offers we took on that property was a 610 and a 700. And I remember saying to Justin, like, as the market tanked overnight, nobody's told me, because these two offers that came through, I'm like, oh my God, the owners were wanting 1.3, and like, we're so far away. And then obviously the offers started coming in, you know, $1 million, 1.1, 1.2, and then eventually selling at 1.375. But when you look at the difference between what it sold for and then the lowest offer, it was, you know, dramatic.
Well, I think, you know, a similar story occurred when you were looking after one of our employees' properties and their sales, and I can't remember how many offers came in on that property, but I think you had about 20-something offers on that property, and the variance between the lowest through to the sale price is so drastically significant that it does become a question. I think the big issue with people selling properties, but also people buying, is it's a really emotionally charged situation. You know, from an owner's point of view, it's worrying, it's concerning, and they don't know exactly what's going to happen and what it is they're going to achieve for their property. But equally, it's an emotionally charged decision for people that are buying. I mean, it's where our kids grow up, it's where we celebrate their milestone birthdays, it's where, you know, people nurse family members that are extremely ill and sometimes sadly pass. So there's so much tied into our homes. It goes well beyond just a financial decision. And I guess as real estate agents, we really need to understand that. And I think we need to really work with the owners and the buyers. I mean, a buyer that is emotionally engaged in the purchase of a property is clearly going to pay more for that property than a buyer who is less emotionally engaged. And so I think our job is to source that buyer that's really going to be emotionally engaged with the property, and then subsequently they're going to be the ones to shell out the most amount of money for it. And as an agent, I think, people don't realise that we have a legal duty for our owners. We have a fiduciary duty, and that is to achieve the absolute best possible outcome we can for our sellers. We're employed by the sellers, we're paid by the sellers, and our job is very clear. And I know that, with our agency, we make it very clear to buyers that we're working for our seller.
Well, I mean, there's two things I always find funny in real estate when people say, oh, you're just trying to get more money. Yes, that's my job. Or when people say, oh, you just want to sell my house. Well, yeah, if you're thinking of selling, I do want to sell your house. That's how I feed my kids. Like, I want to sell your house, but I don't want to sell your house if you're not ready to sell.
Yeah.
It's, it's just when people say those things, it's like they've identified some, they've cracked the code. No, there is no code. We do want to get the best price for our sellers, and we do want to sell your house if you're ready to sell.
That's exactly right. And often, even as an auctioneer, you can see buyers that are holding the highest bid when you're above the reserve price, and they're almost willing you to knock it down to them. But again, as an auctioneer, even, our job is clear, where they're working on behalf of the owner, and we will milk every last dollar that we can out of a sale for our clients. Equally, as a buyer, it gives you the opportunity thereafter to be able to act on their behalf when they come to sell the property. So I've done a lot of real estate training, both attending training myself, but also delivering a lot of training myself. And I've worked with literally hundreds of salespeople in regards to, how we deal with both our sellers and our buyers. And I think that if you're open about your responsibility to your seller and what the job is, and you're open and you're upfront with people at the very beginning, they tend to appreciate that level of honesty and transparency. But many years ago, I was attending a training. It was actually a negotiation workshop with regards to specific real estate negotiation, which a lot of people think that as real estate agents, in some way, we're miraculously born with great negotiating skills, when in fact it's a learnt art like anything. And we've spent a lot of time, I know, in our agency, but I've also spent a lot of time over the years honing my skills and attending various workshops and seminars and reading books and listening to podcasts and listening to people and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things I learned a long time ago was that the way buyers interact with the market is, and again, this comes down to the emotional engagement. When we're shopping, and I think it applies to all of us, whether we're a real estate agent or whether we're not, when we're looking to buy a home, I think generally we sort of set out with a fairly rational idea as to what it is we think we're going to buy, what sort of price range we'd like to buy in, and of course we go out and have a look at all the offerings that are available. And we tend to find ourselves, the moment we latch onto that property that we love, and I've got to say, I think myself included, I don't think people buy homes they don't love. That they look for a long time, and what they're looking for is the home that they can walk into and it just immediately feels right for them. And there's a suggestion that when a buyer, being me or any buyer, finds that property that they fall in love, the rational approach to their buying, the preconceived capped limits on what they're prepared to pay sort of go out the window. And it can be anywhere from sort of 10 to 30% more than their initial concept as to what they were going to spend. And that comes down to the fact that when you love something, and particularly if there's other buyers that are competing with you, then you're going to give it your all because you really want to secure that property for yourself and for your family. So I think to understand those emotions that we go through, both as sellers and buyers, I think are important, and I think it can make a path that allows us to deliver the sorts of results that people need, both from a buying point of view, but equally importantly and probably more importantly from a selling point of view. Yeah.
I always think back to, I remember when I lived back in England and there was an advert for the new Volkswagen Golf, £23,000 or whatever it was. I saw the advert, I thought, oh yeah, that looks decent. Went to the dealership, looked at the car, yep, pretty good, like I'm happy with that. And then literally as we were walking into the showroom, and I don't know if this guy did it on purpose or not, but they drove the GTI like past me, and this guy saw me look, he said, oh, why don't you just sit in that for a minute? £35,000 later,
yeah.
drove by in the GTI.
But that's a classic example, right?
Exactly.
Of, you become emotionally engaged with something and you just have to have it. I think it's, again, in one of the negotiation books that I've read many years ago, the theory was take the puppy home for a weekend, and that was the sort of heading of that particular article that I was reading, and it was really how, the pet stores years and years ago, when a family would come in and they were umming and ahhing, and you could see mum and dad weren't particularly keen on buying a dog, but they were appeasing the kids by taking them into the pet store. They'd say, listen, why don't you take the puppy home for the weekend and see if he fits in with the family? And of course, once that puppy goes home with you, including mum and dad, fall in love with the little guy or girl and end up buying it. So I think that's, that is the thing that creates value. It's the level of desire someone has for that property and the owner's preparedness to be able to sell it at the price that a buyer's prepared to pay. Yeah. Willing buyer and a willing seller.
Yeah. I mean, that's something else. Like people always, when they say, a property's worth what someone's willing to pay. But I always say, no, a property's worth what someone's willing to pay and what someone's willing to accept. Because if you've got $1 million home and someone offers you 600, it doesn't mean it's worth 600.
Yeah, correct.
But if that seller says, well, actually, I'll sell for 600, then why they would do that, I don't know. But what I'm saying is, that's where value starts to get set, is when someone is offering to pay that and then someone accepts it. But as a buyer, if you just looking in, an agent should be able to provide comparable sales. But again, what I see as comparable as an agent could be very different. It's like that meme that you see where it's like, how an owner sees their house, how the buyers see the house, how the agent sees the house, how the bank see the house, and it's all completely different. So the comparable sales that I may offer, or any agent may offer, a buyer could look and go, well, I don't agree. But you can do your own, like realestate.com is so, accessible now. You can literally just go sales in the last 3 months, 6 months, whatever, in a certain area, and you're going to see. And then you once you've visited a property and you've seen it yourself, you can go, okay, well, this one's better because it's got slightly bigger bedrooms, or it's nicer finish, and then you can calculate your own value from there. So,
100%. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You mentioned that there's numerous people that are party to a transaction when it comes to real estate, and we're all thinking different prices and for different reasons. You've got sellers that are thinking, gee, I hope I get this price. If I can't, I'm prepared to sell it for that price. So it's sort of they have what we call a say and a think price. The say price is the public price that they tell us. They make it clear that this is what we want. But I think there's a think price where they're thinking, if I can get this price, then I'm going to be okay and I'm going to be happy to sell. I think buyers do the same thing. They have a say and a think price as well. And I think buyers will look at a property and they'll be saying a lower price. Listen, I'm not prepared to pay any more because of this reason. But, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, well, if I've got to go up to that price, I'm happy to do it. So there's these sorts of circumstances of different prices being bandied around. And then you brought in the banks. And that's an important one too, because a lot of owners also don't realise this, as well as buyers, that the mere fact that the both of you agree on a price to purchase and sell a property doesn't necessarily mean the bank are going to agree with you. And if you're borrowing money, and depending on the amount you're borrowing, but these days typically the bank will do all of their due diligence and they will get the valuers out to value the property. And valuers are in a fortunate position when they value a property, whether it's done as a private valuation, i.e. you're a homeowner and you're thinking of selling your property, and rather than take the advice of 6 different agents that could give you 6 different prices, you decide to call a licensed valuer in. The difference between the licensed valuer is that you've got to pay them whether you like the price they tell you or not. Whereas a real estate agent knows full well that they're going to try to tell you the price you'd like to hear, and this is where it can all fall apart. And I think that, my dad is a really good example. We were selling my dad's property, and he was one of the typical people that had listed his property with all the local agents, and I think he'd been on the market for over 12 months. And
he used to be an agent himself.
And he'd been a real estate agent all his life and had very big and very successful real estate agencies in Melbourne. And he was getting very frustrated that he wasn't able to get the result. And it was interesting because, when we opened our office up here, I said to Dad, look, I'm going to come up and have a talk to you. It looks like I'm going to have to look after things for you. And when we got up there and spoke with him, there was a few things that we were able to do to help expedite the process and get the property sold. Number one was decluttering his place. He's an older chap, and his wife... And of course, they had a lifetime of trinkets and bits and pieces and all their comfortable things in their home, which we all do. But did it present well? Did the photography look good? Did it look good online? No, it didn't. And so that was the first thing. And it was very difficult for them to unclutter their home because these are all the things they love. The photos of the kids and the grandkids and, all of those sorts of things, the great-grandkids and all the trinkets that you collect throughout your lifetime, and their furniture that was high quality furniture when they bought it, but these days it's the sort of furniture that none of the kids and family members wanted, and they end up getting thrown out. But for them to unclutter a home was a big deal, and so we were able to, help get my dad's head around the fact that I said to him really simply, when you had your business, if you had a property on the market for 12 months, what would you be telling your owner if it hadn't sold? And he said, I'd be telling him it's too expensive. And I said, well, why haven't you reduced your price? Why haven't you met the market? And it sort of resonated with him at that point. And so we were able to get him sold and get him moved where he wanted to be. But the reason I tell this story is that I actually sold that property and the valuers came out. And this sort of ties back into what you were saying about, everybody's party to that transaction. And the people that bought Dad's property bought it subject to finance. They had a pretty substantial deposit. But when the valuers came out, we'd actually sold the property for considerably more. And by considerably more, I mean enough that the buyers couldn't obtain finance on the property. So that sale unfortunately didn't proceed for Dad, and the only reason that we were able to sell the property for not a great deal less than what it sold for the first time is because the people that were buying it had funding themselves. They didn't rely on the bank, so they were able to, close that sale and settle. But yeah, I mean, we must remember that when we sell a property, that it's not just whether the buyer wants to pay that price and whether you're prepared to accept it. It's also if people are borrowing money, are the banks going to lend against it? And probably more than ever, the banks are now more cautious than ever. I mean, we've had obviously royal commissions into the banking industry, and APRA have been involved, and they've really, put down and set down some foundations for borrowing and how that's to happen. And so to avoid people borrowing a certain amount of money that they can't afford to pay back, the banks have got considerable guidelines that they have to adhere to.
It's like when I sold 25th Ave the first time. That was wasn't an auction sale, but it was auction condition. So cooling off waived, full deposit, no finance, no building and pest, and then the value. And I sold it for $150,000 more than the owners were hoping for.
Yep.
Exactly $150,000 more. And then the valuer came out and said, there's no way, I can't value this. And then the buyer was ringing me saying, I want the valuer's number. I said, mate, I can't give his number. But he had to chip in more of his own money because the bank wouldn't lend. So, if that had been subject to finance, that would have fallen through. And they would have had to then I'd try and sell it to someone on a different
more of a cash basis or at a reduced price, because again, if the valuers come out and they don't see value at the price it's sold with, and you sell it again for the same price to somebody that's in the same position with borrowings, you're going to end up with the same result, which is a sale not sticking. So value's a really, really tricky subject, and it's hard for owners and for buyers to get their heads around where it is. I mean, it's hard for agents, to be brutally honest with you. I mean, we've been doing this for a long, long time, and I've been involved in selling real estate for, getting close to 40 years. And we've recently did an auction where, we had a reserve price at 1.1 million, which we thought was relatively fair and reasonable. And we had no offers prior to the auction above that. And so the reserve was set at that level. And, we ended up, I think, with 26 registered bidders on that property, and we ended up selling it for $522,000 above the reserve price. Now, people look at that and go, well, surely you should have known that. Well, we had no idea that would happen. And you don't know until the day.
And nor did 17 of the bidders that were there, because they all tapped out
the
straight away.
opening bid knocked out the vast majority of them. So, it only took a few of them to take it to the next level. But yeah, value's a tricky thing, and it's a tricky conversation, and it's a conversation that needs to be had with a little bit of care and a little bit of consideration. And I think that the days of an agent walking through a property and sort of, looking around at the room and saying, oh, look, I reckon I can get you this for it. I think you need to be looking at an agent that's going to put in a little bit more effort in terms of how they arrive at an estimation of price, but also be prepared and be reasonably fluid that potentially you may get more, but potentially you may get less. And I think it's good communication that helps an owner through that process, whichever outcome occurs.
So fears, frustrations, and funnies.
What is it this week?
This week is fears.
Yep.
Maybe again. Can't remember. Fears.
Well, people have a lot of fears.
Well, there is a lot of fear.
And
it's a scary business. So yeah, this week is sellers being fearful of being overpromised by an agent, whether that be the level of service, how quick it's going to sell, the price they're going to get, just in general, the fear of being overpromised. Is the agent that's talking to me, are they just telling me, are they just telling me what I want to hear and then they're going to let me down, which is obviously what can happen.
And I guess these days there's lots of ways for people to do a little bit of research on the calibre of agent and the quality of service that's going to be provided. I mean, let's face facts. We're not a retail business. We can't go out and just buy stock and put it in our shop and sell it, as lots of retail businesses do. We're a consignment business. And so as a consignment business, the only thing we really have to offer anybody, quite frankly, is service. Obviously, there's quite a bit of skill that goes into all the various processes that apply to the sale of a property, but it's service-based industry, and if you're not providing service, then, I think people get a little bit upset, don't they? And the big problem for a lot of consumers is they generally will sign an exclusive agency agreement, meaning that the agent is exclusively appointed to sell the property. No other agent can sell it. And so from an owner's perspective, they want to hope they make the right choice to begin with, because if they haven't, then they're locked in. Yep. And that causes a great deal of heartache for owners, I think, if they have made a mistake in their selection of agent. And I mean, we've picked up many listings that have been with other agents, and the owners have had a lot of horror stories about how they've been treated and how they've been spoken to, and that they were promised the world and they were, it wasn't delivered. And I don't think delivery of service is necessarily tied into price. And again, it starts at the beginning. If you're having good pricing conversations with your owner and they're transparent and they're honest and they're considered, then I think that, the delivery of service does not necessarily have to be tied back into the price that we achieve for an owner. And I think that that's an important thing to note, because, people give you the keys to their home and they leave the home and they let you have access to their property. It's their private sanctuary. We're in their en-suites, we're in their bathrooms and their bedrooms, and they're really private areas that we have. And I think that, for an owner to be comfortable with an agent, they need to be comfortable that the person they're giving the keys to their front door and leaving their home for a period of time in the care of that agent, I think it's important. It even goes down to open for inspections. I think one of my pet hates is, people that don't have respect for other people's homes, and they come into an open for inspection with, 2 or 3 kids in tow, and they might be young children, but the parents go off and the kids are just, jumping over furniture and I know, in our agency we're always politely but quite firmly asking parents to keep a little control and restraint over their kids, because they're in someone else's home. So there is a lot of delivery of service. Simple things like communication, and, if your owner calls you, or if it's your landlord, or if it's a tenant, being able to respond in time as quickly as you can. I mean, we are busy. We're always in appointments. You can't always be interrupted, but you should always be able to return a call. You should always be able to reply to an email. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest complaints. I don't know if you agree with that, but the lack of response, sometimes you don't get any. And, I recall when my wife and I were looking at buying a property, and we were based in Melbourne at the time, and we owned and were running a pretty significant real estate company there, and I think I had emailed 12 agents, and I this is not a sort of I'm not overstating the numbers here. I literally emailed 12 agents about 12 properties that I saw online that were of interest to me, and asked if they would kindly return my call or email me back with some further information. I did not get one email response, so I then proceeded to call every single agent, and so I made 12 phone calls. I didn't get through to one of them, which in itself is frustrating. But again, we are busy. And as an estate agent, I know what it's like when you're in appointments and people are ringing and your phone's going hot, but you can't take the call. You're not going to interrupt with the client you're with. But I would certainly call someone back. Well, of the 12 phone calls and 12 messages, voicemail messages that I left, I received 0 calls back. So of the 12 emails and the 12 phone calls that were made, 2 of the agents that I had emailed whilst they didn't respond to me by phone or respond to my email, they did put me on their automated newsletter system, which I guess is better than nothing. But this is what I'm getting at in terms of service. And, you know, our industry has evolved to the point where we're so bad at dealing with people in many cases that buyers now feel the need to go to a buyer's agent because we're just not delivering the service to people in the way that I recall when I first came into the industry. I mean, you dealt with people, they rang you, you called them back, they emailed you, you emailed them back, and you followed people up. And that seems to lack. We seem to manage campaigns really well, you know, like sales campaigns, open for inspections, you know, open the door, let the buyers in. But a lot of agents do very little thereafter. And from an owner's point of view, you're not going to know that until after you've listed your property.
Yeah.
So, yeah, service is a big thing, and under delivery of service, I think, would be the primary complaint of most people. I think if you are really honest and forthright with your owners and you don't sugarcoat things, if you're doing it tough, you need to let your owner know. If things are going well, you need to let your owner know. If offers are being made, the owner needs to be immediately informed about those offers. And, you know, I can't tell you the number of buyers over the years that have told us horror stories that they made an offer and just there was no feedback. It just got sold to someone else. They weren't given an opportunity of an increase. So if I was an owner and I heard that about my property and my agent did that, I'd be livid. And so for many owners, they're rightly angered by our industry because we don't necessarily always do a great job. Look, don't get me wrong, there is a heap of really good real estate agents out there, and typically, you know, I think the market tends to know who they are, but there's also a lot of bad ones. The entry requirements into our industry have been usually quite low, so it didn't take a lot to become a real estate agent. And, you know, I think thankfully now that's changing. I think there's been legislation put in place where continuing professional development to maintain your licence is going to come into force. It certainly is in some of the other states. And I think that's a good thing for our industry. I think anything that can shore our industry up, make us a better profession and more professional, I think is going to be an advantage to the consumer. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about that.
Well, I remember you telling me when we first started working together, like the way that Black and White does the commission structure was based on
service.
On your experience. So you were saying to me that, you know, a lot of agents will wow people in the listing appointment and then disappoint people, you know, after they've had the fee locked in. Yeah. Which is why we do it the other way and basically leave it open to the seller to sort of, you know, reward on what they feel is...
and how hard you've worked and how diligent you've been and how professional you've been in the representation of that property. And by professional, I'm not talking about whether your photos look good and your signs look good. I'm talking about, are you respectful about your client's property? You know, are you being truthful and honest with your owner in every single situation? They're the things that, you know, for most owners when they select an agent, they don't really know that about the agent unless they've worked with them previously. Of course, that's different. But I think to be able to create an environment for your owner where, you know, they know everything that's going on, I think when you have a fee that is hinged on your performance, and I mean, it is always hinged on your performance, but when you give an owner the option of being able to choose a fee within a fairly broad range, the very lower end of that fee might be considered below the average commission, and the upper end of that fee perhaps to be above the average commission. I think that it puts pressure on the owner, the agent, I should say, to do their absolute best. Yep. You know, they've got skin in the game. Yep. If they want to earn a decent fee, you better do decent work. And I think that, you know, I've been using that that format of fee structure for years and years and years. Simply, in fact, from the beginning of deregulation of real estate agents' fees, you see, years ago, and probably before you were in real estate, the state governments regulated the fee that was to be charged to an owner. So it was set down and it was legislated, and that was what an agent could charge. And so there was never a conversation around fee. An agent couldn't use a fee as a means to entice a seller because they were set by the government. And, you know, we would basically not have conversations around fees. So the owner wasn't lining up 3 or 4 agents and saying, who's going to be the cheapest, boys or girls? they would not make a decision on the fee. They would make a decision based on who they felt was most competent to achieve the best possible outcome for them. So it forced us to be better agents, because if we're all charging exactly the same fee, then how does an owner distinguish between one or the other? Yeah. Well, you've got to be able to demonstrate that, and I think that we've had the ability of being able to do that over and over again, where I think you've got to, I mean, of all people that I've ever worked with, you've got to have a story that really cements the idea of a service-based industry, that you get rewarded not necessarily for the price you obtain for an owner, but for how you've made them feel and how you've dealt with them throughout the course of their selling campaign. I think without talking about the address of the property, I'm pretty sure you'll know the one that you'd sold. You'd listed it for an elderly lady, and it was quite the ordeal. You'd sold it a number of times. I'm trying to jog your memory without talking about the address of the property. It started out at a particular price, and that price was a reasonable price based on what we thought and the research that we had done. So it wasn't as though the price had been, pumped up or inflated in any way. In fact, it wasn't inflated because you actually sold it for that price. And do you recall the property I'm talking about in Palm Beach? Yep. Tell us a bit about how that unfolded, because that's a really classic example that when you give an owner the right to penalise you for poor performance or poor service, but you also give them the ability to reward you for great service or a great result.
Well, this is a perfect segue into real talk.
Yeah. Real talk, real people.
Real stories. So that particular story, I remember, that was actually as well, I don't even know if you remember, but that was the first listing that I ever went out on my own and got. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so I went out to see Virginia, the lady's name was. Went out to see her. Just thinking I was just going to have a chat, and then the conversation went really well, and I had a blank Form 6 in my folder. And
as you should.
As I should, yeah. And just literally sat and filled everything in while I was there.
She obviously felt comfortable with you.
Yeah.
To be able to do that.
Yeah. At the time I remember thinking that it was all a bit surreal, because it just kind of happened.
And went easily.
And I only found out afterwards that she'd actually interviewed 2 other agents before. So I thought I was the first person she'd spoken to, and she'd just gone, okay, well, yeah, you can sell it. But she'd actually spoken to a couple of agents previously. So that felt even better. But yeah, I mean, this is quite a few years ago now. So obviously the market shifted significantly. But I think I'd appraised the property at $650, I think it was, and we knew there were some issues with the house. It obviously needed
it was an older home.
It was an older home, and we needed some fairly substantial renovations, but that's the basis that we were selling it on. Yeah, and
it was quite original.
Very original, yeah. So anyway, we ended up within a few weeks. This young couple came through, fell in love with it, put a contract on it. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it must have been.
From memory, it was close to 650, if not at 650.
Yeah. Anyway, did the deal, did a building and pest, and then
failed.
Well, it didn't fall through straight away. The couple, they were so in love with it, they actually got builders and all the tradies out, to get it all quoted.
They were significant. I think that's an important thing for you to state here. We're not talking about
subsidence.
Cosmetic stuff.
It was
we're
major.
Talking about serious structural issues that the home had. And as a young couple, they were first home buyers from memory. They're things that you just can't afford to absorb in your first purchase. So.
Yeah, that's right. So with the quotes that they got, it was the best part of $100,000 that they would have had to spend on top, and they just said, look, we just can't afford it, and so they had to pull out. So anyway, I kept in touch with that couple, showed them through a few other places, and every time I showed them another place, they're like, oh, but it's just not quite that as good as that one. So I then continued to do. I was doing open homes every Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
Sold it again. But for less. So the price
was only
cheaper.
About 25,000
something like that.
less.
Yeah. So it sold for less. Building and pest fell through again.
Same problem.
This time they didn't go through all the rigmarole of getting quotes and stuff. They just would know we're out.
It was too big.
Yeah.
In terms of the report, they looked at it and thought, we just don't
We're
want to deal
out,
with
yeah.
this. Yeah.
So anyway, kept working it. A couple of weeks later, sold it again. And then this time we were really getting down to basically land value at that point. And this couple, we didn't actually get a contract on it the third time, but we were basically, this couple were like, yeah, we're going to buy it. This is the offer we're going to make. And that was on a Sunday afternoon. We'll call you in the morning and we'll get everything done. Anyway, on the Monday morning, I dropped the kids off at school.
Yep.
And in fact, Eden would have been, she was in prep at the time.
Very little.
Very tiny, yeah. So anyway, they got out of the car, and then I just saw this envelope on the footwell in the passenger seat. So I'm like, what's that? I picked it up, opened it up, and inside was the quote. So when this young couple at the beginning, this is weeks before, they'd got the quotes done, but they'd given me a copy as well.
So you could show the owner.
Yeah, and I just ended up in the car. So I opened it up, and I'm sat in the school car park, and I'm looking, and the quote like nearly 100 grand, but then the price on the house by this stage was pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So I quickly rang the girl, and I said, look, if I could give you this money to do the repairs, would you buy the house? She's like, what are you talking about? I said, just answer the question. If I gave you that money, would you buy the house?
Yeah.
She went, definitely. I said, right, this is the situation. I said, I've got someone calling me this morning. They're not going to do a building and pest because they know the house is, I've told them that it's failed twice already. They will be subject to finance.
And she was not from memory.
She wasn't, no.
That's right.
So her dad was helping her with the purchase. And then I said, but they will be subject to finance. I said, you've already done your building and pest. You know what the issues are. You know what the price is. I said, and the cost of getting the works done, they're going to sell this house for basically what you were going to pay minus that. Yeah. I'll call you back. So anyway, 10 minutes later, her dad rings me, or I'd had dealings with him throughout the process before. He's like, Paul, we're in. Send us the contract. We'll get it signed. So anyway, went back to the office, did the paperwork, sent it off, got it all done. The couple from the Sunday never rang me. They never even got back in touch. And I tried following up with them, but they just didn't even answer the phone. So they'd obviously gone home and then, changed their mind.
Yeah.
So we ended up selling the property. They got it for the price minus the costs and, happy days. So anyway, circling back to what you were talking about before, where, it doesn't always come down to the price. Obviously, this lady ended up selling a lot less than she expected, but it wasn't my fault. She'd inherited the house and we just didn't know how bad the house was until these building and pests had happened. So when I went to her and I said, Virginia, look, I need to sign off the commission, but I don't expect anything more than the base because you sold for so much less. Yeah. And she said, you're joking. She said, you've been here for 2.5 months, every Saturday, every Sunday. You've done midweek inspections. She said that you've sold the place nearly 4 times. She went, how much is it if I pay you that? Pointed to the higher end of the range. So quickly worked it out, showed it. She went, that's fine. Yeah. So I got the top end of the commission. And I mean, the difference was significant. $4,000 or $5,000, that she didn't have to pay. But she was adamant because she said it's not about the price. It wasn't your fault. So it's
it's interesting, isn't it? Because it can go the other way. You can get an outstanding result for somebody, but they're not necessarily in the financial position to reward you above the base rate. That's so. Right. I think it's a very fair fee system that we use in our agency. I'm not sure if the greater community really understand what it is we do and what we offer, because I think it's a pretty attractive thing. It's a little bit, it's like if you go to a restaurant, for example, and you walk in and you're looking at the menu and you place your order, but then they expect you to pay for it before they even deliver the food. I don't know about you, but that sort of rings a few alarm bells for me, because I think I'm paying for something. I don't even know what I'm getting. I have no idea how long it'll take for them to deliver the food to me. I don't know what the quality of the food's going to be like, and I don't know whether they're going to be nice in terms of how they serve. So there's all those unknowns. So it's one of those things that whenever I've got to pay for a meal before the food is delivered, I'm always a little concerned about that. Of course, then you get a restaurant that as most restaurants trade, is you sit down and the waiter comes to you or the waitress, and they will offer you, drinks, and they'll be attentive, and you get to measure their service, and you get the food before you're paying for it. In other words, the restaurant is prepared to back itself. We'll give you the food, then you're going to pay us after. And of course, typically, if you go to a restaurant, for example, and you have a great meal and the service is just fantastic, and the chef comes out and asks you how the meal was and all those sorts of things, you just have such a great experience that you tip people. You give more than what they're expecting you to give. And I guess the system that we utilise in our agency is good in the sense that people really get the opportunity to eat in our restaurant, try our food, see how we serve, and then make a decision after all of that as to what they're going to pay based on how good that meal was and how good the service was. And I think that that's probably why I think our system is strong, because I think it gives people the chance to almost try before you buy.
Yeah. Or at least try before you pay.
Well, yeah, exactly right. So, but yeah, I think that I think it all ties back into the original conversation too about, if you're over promising and you're under delivering, then there's a very underwhelming experience for a lot of homeowners. But regardless of price, which we do impact. A good negotiator, a good real estate negotiator, I've seen you put deals together that are so far above where we all would have thought they might have been. But it's good negotiation, and it's not negotiation where a buyer feels that they've been ripped off. Far from it. Yep. They're dealt with transparently. The idea of when there's multiple offers, everybody knows where they stand in relation to how that's handled, and they know that before they commence the process of trying to negotiate to buy a property. That I do feel that we can add significant value, but I think if you fall into the trap of looking at an agent and someone comes in and they promise you the highest price and they promise you the lowest fee. The question that I always used to put to somebody that I was talking to when they said, Michael, we've got another agent round the corner and he's said considerably more than you and his fee's a lot lower than yours. And it used to frustrate me because I used to think, it takes no skill at all to tell an owner a price that you can't achieve just to win their business and to undercut the entire industry just to be the cheapest. Yeah. I just don't see it as a viable thing for an owner to be coerced into doing business with people that use those two primary levers to pull, because I think that, you're going to run into strife when an agent over-promises the price, tells you they're going to do it for next to nothing, and then they literally do next to nothing for you, and it causes huge frustration. And particularly if you've got a real genuine reason to get your property sold, it can be financially catastrophic. So I think our system works really well, and I think that we've got so much history of clients that have done that. And I think I was referring to reviews. I was going to refer to reviews in the previous segment we were talking about in regards to how does an owner sort of establish the calibre of a real estate agent, before they list with you, If you've got 4 agents that you're interviewing, chances are they're all very personable. They've usually got great personalities. They dress impeccably. They speak well. How on earth do you discern between them? Okay, well, we can work on fees, who's going to be the cheapest or who's going to do the best marketing deal for us. And these things influence people, but, reviews are an important part of our industry and what we do. And, before there were websites with, third-party industries that are making huge amounts of money out of our industry by, having review-based websites, which is still good. But, we tend to do a lot of our reviews on realestate.com. Yep. They're verified reviews. They're people that can't lodge a review and create a fake review. Unless you've transacted. So I think reviews now are really important to be able to look a little deeper into the type of agent you're dealing with. I would probably suggest that, in the absence of an agent having reviews, because the difficulty with reviews, if you look at an agent that's got 100 reviews and you look at an agent that's got 2 reviews, are you going to be influenced by the number of reviews that someone has? And I guess we are to an extent, but if you like the agent, then ask them to talk to the person they've just sold for.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, I've got people that I can just literally call and put on speakerphone, and then I'm just sat with a client now, just and tell them why they should list with me rather than anybody else. And
And I mean, that in the old days, that's what we did for reviews. You know, I remember selling a house in Melbourne years and years and years ago, and I think at the time I got about 350 grand more for it than what it was worth. And it was in a suburb called Northcote in Melbourne, which is sort of an inner northern suburb of Melbourne, sort of inner city. And the guy listed the property with me because I had sold one around the corner from his, and he didn't quite believe the price I got for it. So he rang me and he said, I've heard a whisper that you sold Bastings Street for this particular price. And he lived in Andrews Street. I still remember the street very well. And I'm talking, this goes back probably 20 years when I sold this property for him. Anyhow, I said, yeah, I did sell it for that. And I remember him saying, well, how did you get that sort of a price for that? And I said, mate, are you thinking of selling? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, well, could I come and have a decent conversation with you rather than try to throw something at you over the phone that might stick? I'd rather sit with you and explain in detail what it is I did, which I did. And I remember that I auctioned that property, and the method that we were using at the time, I just instinctively knew that my highest bidder had more money. So I advised Tony, was the name of the guy I was selling for, to pass the property into this buyer and negotiate with him privately after the auction. And we let him walk that day, and Tony was very reluctant to let this buyer walk because it was pretty much at the price he was hoping to get for it, below what I thought I could get for it. It took me another week of negotiating with this buyer, but I ended up getting him to pay about an extra $300,000 or $350,000 for it. The irony of that is that my dad was an auctioneer in Northcote, and that was one of the areas that my dad owned very successful real estate businesses, and a very well-known auctioneer back in the day, my dad. And one of the guys that used to work with my dad, who was good mates with my dad, came up to me after the auction and he said, gee, he goes, I tell you what, he goes, your dad was a good auctioneer. He said, but I think you might be better. He goes, but you made one fatal mistake that your dad never would have made. And I said, what's that, Peter? And he said, your old man would have sold it, he wouldn't have passed it in. And I said, well, I think I'm going to get more. And he goes, mate, that price that you got for it today is outstanding. You should have sold it. He was considerably older than me at the time. Anyhow.
It still is.
Well, yeah. And he's still in real estate too, this
Really?
fella. He's a nice bloke. He's a good guy. But I ended up negotiating the sale within the week for 300 and something odd thousand more. Tony was just out of his mind, happy with the result. The buyer was stoked. And I remember calling the agent, Peter, who was at the auction. I said, Peter, I've sold it. He goes, oh, good, well done, mate, well done. What did you get, the price that you got on the day of auction? And I told him, and he said, you've got to be joking me. Well, talking about, you know, having your client be your review, a live review, I think is much better than what's written on you, because you get more depth as to how the agent is and how they look after you. And Tony, the guy that owned the property, and he owned a business that he was a tailor. He made suits. So we ended up calling him Suit and Tie Tony. And it's interesting because he made all the graduation suits for our kids.
Like a character from Snatch.
Yeah. Suit and Tie Tony sort of sounds like a little bit of an underworld film, but he's not by any stretch of the imagination. But he was such a great guy, and he'd say to me, mate, if you ever need me to act as a testimonial for you, he goes, people need to know what it is you do and how you do things differently. And he goes, and I'd be happy to talk. Well, I reckon Suit and Tie Tony helped me into probably another 30 or 40 listings that without his support and help, I don't think I would have achieved. And so, you know, I look at every client that we work for, and I know you do, that's exactly what we want. You know, the one commission that you're going to earn out of a seller, it's not going to make or break you. You know, in the big scheme of your career, if you don't get a commission, one commission, so what? But if you get one unhappy client, well, so what? That's going to impact you. And I think for us, to be able to satisfy people to an extent where they're volunteering to pay you more than they have to with the fee, to be able to act as your referee, a proper verbal reference rather than just something that's written up on a Google review or a Rate My Agent or any one of the sites that people obviously refer to. But I think it carries more credence and more weight.
Real talk.
Real people.
Real stories.
Real estate.
Till next time, my friend.
Nice chatting to you. See you in the office.
This is When I Grow Up with Glazby.